Andy Austin here with another chapter review from The Rainbow Machine, Tales from a Neurolinguist's Journal. Available on Amazon. You can buy the book and leave a review. It would be very appreciated. This is the Word Salad Dave chapter. I call it a chapter. It's actually just under a page. And the story really given here is an incident that happened within a residential psychiatric unit. I refer to it as a residential psychiatric unit. It was actually a very large manor house out in the countryside that some long-standing patients were lucky enough to live in. Although it was a mixed blessing, because the environment on its fantastic grounds, the house was huge. It was like a manor house. It was absolutely fantastic environment. The problem is it was managed by psychiatric staff. And I say that was the problem because the level of control that was exerted upon the residential population of that unit, of which there was only probably about 12 of them, was horrible. It was something you'd see in the book or movie One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. The Nurse Ratched mentality of totalitarian control. And you essentially had to kiss the ass of the boss at all times because she was quite a moody bitch. I can't speak nicely of her because she was just evil as far as I was concerned because of the control she exerted upon the lives of these people. This was supposed to be long-term residential setting, part of a community rehabilitation program. So people would be there for years at a time. And the idea was they would be able to make their own choices. It was supportive living. But it wasn't. It was controlled living. And if you said the wrong thing, if the boss was in a mood, and of course, who did she employ? She employed people like herself, people who would play the game that she wanted them to play. So it wasn't really a free-thinking environment. They didn't employ me for very long. When I went into this environment, I was a little bit concerned immediately about the nature of some of the facial expressions and the contemptuous looks, because clearly I wasn't going to fit in. And that to me gave a lot away about what it must be like to be a resident here if you're not a face that fits. So unfortunately everyone has to play the game, and that didn't seem to be particularly healthy to me. Now within that environment, various dramas started to emerge, and that's what the Word Salad Dave chapter is about, the craziness that can actually happen within a community of people. And I didn't see this as a craziness occurring within a community of psychiatric patients. This is just the madness that happens when groups of people live together. And there's an oppressive regime or there's a set of rules. I'm thinking like the halls of residence within a university or college, where there's some rigid rules in place, but a lot of hijinks happen within that environment. And so there's a subculture that management never see until things actually raise above a threshold. And the fun and the humanity that gets shared between people is not usually witnessed by the people controlling the environment. You'll see the same thing in a school environment. The teachers may well have a good knowledge of what's happening within the school, but information can be passed between school children that sweeps through the school in minutes, and it's invisible to every adult looking upon it, because they're not part of the subculture of that group of people. And the same thing happens in residential settings, in any group of people. And so the Word Salad Dave story is a tragedy in a way, because there was a lot of stuff that could have been utilized to be fun. It could have been the creativity of people, the insanity of it, the fun insanity, not the bad insanity of the situation that arose around these budgies and the fish, and there was just a whole load of stuff going on. Could have actually been utilized in a much better way. Essentially all that happened was Word Salad Dave, because he didn't make any sense, because he spoke in word salad all the time, it was deemed that he had transgressed because of the incident that had happened. And rather than seeing this as a funny thing, it was seen as a bad thing, and therefore he was an aberration within the game plan of the boss. And so he was then medicated, and Word Salad Dave became Dave. And before, he would walk around giggling and laughing, and no one really knew what he was laughing at, but he was happy. He certainly seemed to be a happy chappy, doing his own thing in his own world. And then he just became a dribbling fool who didn't say anything at all and didn't seem to have any emotions. What bothers me is that the people working in that environment, including the people on the peripheries of that, which were the psychiatric professionals who would then be prescribing those drugs. Because within the environment, they're residential housing workers employed by psychiatry rather than psychiatrists and psychiatric nurses. Everyone looking upon Dave saw his new state, sitting quietly, not doing anything at all, as an improvement. They actually said, oh, he's stabilized now. And I didn't see him as being stabilized or improved. I just saw him gone. He was there in body, but he wasn't there in mind anymore. He wasn't there at all. He was just a physical shell of who he was before. Where he was there before, he was up and about doing his own thing. Okay, he was putting the budgie cage up in a tree and putting chips in the fish tank, fish and chips. Those are the kinds of things he was doing, but he had life, he had things going on, he was happy. And then he was just a nobody. He had become what R.D. Laing called a non-person. And this can happen when people are subjected to both a diagnosis that changes their identity. People don't suffer from schizophrenia, they don't suffer from depression. They become a depressive, a schizophrenic. And then they take their medication because they have to take their medication because the doctor says and culture says and society says. And now if a schizophrenic gets angry about something, about you, about an injustice, about something that's something wrong, have you taken your medication today, David? And so now they become a non-person because they're not permitted to have a bad day. They're not permitted to have something that disagrees with the system, because that's a sign of their symptoms. That is a symptom of their schizophrenia, and that is a symptom of them needing medication and control. But the people giving the medication and control don't think in those terms. They think in terms of stabilizing the patient, helping the patient. One of the things that's happened recently is this increased demand of improvement of mental health for the mentally ill population. What that translates to is a noble aim. I get it. I totally get it. But how that gets translated is more medication in high doses for more people. That's simply how it gets translated. But people don't realize that when they see the news stories, they see the campaigns, they see these mental health charities cropping up to push for greater legislation to help the people on the streets, to help the people with mental illness. It basically equates to drug more people with bigger doses of drugs. And in actual practice, it doesn't get translated in the way that the intention is coming, because the intention is usually a good intention. And I don't doubt the professionals doing these things also have good intentions. They're good people. But they can't see it. And one of the problems that I always had working in mental health environments was I could see it and I couldn't keep my mouth shut. And that's why I kept losing my job. I was sacked a few times, it would be fair to say. And quite a few times I resigned before getting sacked because I could foresee not being able to get another job afterwards. If I piss these people off, I better go before I get pushed. And so this is a real problem, because now the system rewards people that conform to the system and punishes those people who are an aberration to it. So the people trapped within it, people like Word Salad Dave, just become Dave because we take the word salad away, and we take away with that his personality, his entity as a human. And members of staff that rail against that kind of stuff and want a more humane, reasonable approach in dealing with people like myself aren't usually welcome within that system, and so we get forced out too. So the systems become self-selecting. And once you have a self-selecting system, it's almost impossible to get it to change, because at what point, at what level do you go in to create a change is almost impossible to do, because you can't go in from the outside straight in at the top. You have to work your way through, and that can be very, very difficult to do if you have to keep your mouth shut and perpetrate the very things that you're trying to change. Because the moment you refuse to drug people, which I've done, and I know what happens when you are ordered to drug somebody and I go, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not prepared to do that. It is incredible for what happens next. So the system doesn't like people who dissent from it. There's one additional thing I want to give in this little video. And it was a situation I had in a rehabilitation centre. This was a psychiatric rehab unit. And I think my job lasted there really just a number of days. I was there, I think, 1 or 2 days a week. And so I was only really there for 2 or 3 weeks before they got rid of me. And the thing that got me dismissed was a very simple action that would happen. Now, this was a community-based unit. So no one was residential. People would come in each day. And so that it was a daycare centre. Different portions of the population, of the psychiatric population, would come in each day. And on one particular morning, it was a group of elderly mental health patients who had organic illness. How this translates, they've had a lifelong diagnosis of schizophrenia, bipolar, whatever, and now they have Alzheimer's or dementia. And for a lot of those people, those organic conditions will have been drug-induced. And so they would come in essentially for daycare to give their carers or their spouse or their families a day off. And so one day a week, they would come into the centre. There was one lady, and I can best describe her as happily confused. She had no bloody idea who she was, where she was, or what was going on, and yet she seemed to be quite delightful and quite happy, and not a danger to anyone else or herself. She was just happily confused. That's the term that's used. And I was asked to go and do a memory inventory on her. I can't remember what it's called. An MMPI, I think it was called. I can't remember now. I had to go and do a memory inventory. To which I said, why? Because that's what we need to do. She's come in and we have to do an assessment. But I said, for what purpose? She has dementia. She's not going to get any better. She's in for day relief. Why would I do a memory inventory on her? Because I'm asking you to. I'm not going to do that. I'm not prepared to do that. Because what I explained to my boss was, okay, she's over there with a cup of tea and a biscuit in that room where the TV's on. There's other people going on, people in there. She seems quite fine and quite settled, having a nice time. And I'm going to take her to an office, and I'm going to sit her down and ask her some questions that she's not going to be able to answer, just so I can remind her how bad she is, how poor her memory is, how much her brain has degraded. That's what you're asking me to do. We need to do it for the forms. When do the forms become God? There is a happy patient, and I'm about to ruin her. In fact, I start ranting. Every week, does she come in here to be reminded of how mentally ill she is? Is that what's happening? Because anyway, you can imagine, that's a conversation. That didn't go down very well. And I was told what was I doing? I was shirking my responsibilities. And I was actually dismissed from that particular unit because I failed to pull my weight. I wasn't working, I was just slacking off. That was how it was interpreted in the hearing. And then I was dismissed. So I tried to introduce really what I thought was a perfectly reasonable argument, and the argument was not going to be tolerated by the system, well, by this particular manager, because who did I think I was to question the system? That and the fact I'd only been there like 3 or 4 days, or however long it was, those things are simply not welcome. And I'm sure that after I was gone, every week, that same poor lady was taken off into an office and they did a memory inventory on her, just to remind her how bad her memory was and how damaged her brain is.